Minister, if you'd like to make an opening statement, please proceed.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'll introduce the officers that are in the room and then make some very brief opening remarks just in relation to the environment that our school system is in today. Firstly, to my right, Rick Purse, the Chief Executive of the Department for Education. Immediately behind me is Chris Bernardi, the Chief Financial Officer, and to Chris's right is Julianne Riedster, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Department. And behind Chris is Carolyn Crozer-Barlow, who's the Executive Director of the Early Years and Child Development Division of the Education Department. And I will hopefully be able to call upon their assistance if necessary. I want to just briefly make some remarks about the extraordinary work that's been done across our 900 school and preschool sites through the Department for Education, and indeed across 200 non-government schools and hundreds more childcare and early childhood services across South Australia. On Wednesday last week, of course, we received the news that there would be a full lockdown of all schools and preschools in the state except for the provision of supervision to the children of emergency and essential services workers and indeed those very vulnerable children in our community whose best place for them to be was at school. And our site leaders, supported by staff in their sites, were absolutely exemplary and outstanding. They supervised the remainder of the school day to an extraordinarily high level of dedication and professionalism, and supporting our students to be able to go home in a reasonable manner, and indeed so that that day was not lost. It could have been problematic, but across our state those sites handled it really well. And they were expecting to have today and tomorrow as pupil-free days in which to plan for whatever arrangements would be necessary for the 4 days lost education over the period of the anticipated lockdown, potentially online learning, although we were always hoping to be back on site on Wednesday, but even that would have required some adjustment. And then the news on Friday was absolutely outstanding that we didn't have to remain in lockdown of those harsh restrictions for a moment longer than necessary. But of course it was a further set of adjustments for all of our staff across South Australia, and the Chief Executive and I provided all of those staff with that information as soon as possible, with the great news that we could be back on Monday with learning programs and only 2 days lost to our schools and our preschools. But of course, while that is great news, and the feedback I've had from our sites is that our staff are extraordinarily happy to be getting on with the teaching and learning again in our schools, in our sites. They're very pleased to see their children and young people, and our children, our students, are extremely happy to be out of that lockdown and back at school. It is, of course, a fairly significant adjustment. In a year that has been recognised for adjustment after adjustment, every time we've asked our educators to show leadership in our communities and support for our children, they have unquestioningly responded with dedication, with grace and enthusiasm, and the children and young people of South Australia as their focus, and we are so grateful for that work that they have done. They've been flexible and they've been patient, as one of the principals I spoke to before coming in described it. There's been obviously some disruption in some schools that's been greater than others. In our secondary schools, the data we have so far today is reasonably inconclusive. I think we've only had about 3 dozen report in their attendance data up to this point. I'm expecting we'll have more accurate data by the end of the day. But to this point, it's sort of between 50 and 60%, but I don't know whether that includes the Year 12s being taken out or not, which is, of course, they are no longer here. Their last exam was the Japanese exam, which thankfully took place just before the lockdown on Wednesday. So to all of our Year 12s, they've lost their schoolies rite of passage. They've lost many rites of passage this year, but as I've said to a number of them, in end-of-year graduations so far this year, and I'll say to more of them, in 20 or 30 years' time, many people will have forgotten what happened on schoolies, but none of the Year 12s this year will not have a story to tell about their Year 12 year and the resilience they learnt and the outstanding things they learnt. There are a couple of arrangements that do remain restricted in our school sites, or at least presenting differently. A number of events are either had to be cancelled. There were some due to take place during the lockdown, and schools are looking at what can be rescheduled. Some are being restricted, particularly those where an event is going to take place off-site. So I ask all South Australians to be patient with their schools as they work on that adjustment. Excursions are by and large able to continue, so long as obviously the venue where the excursion is to has an appropriate arrangements in place. Camps, there's not a one answer for all of the camp arrangements. I know that there are some examples of camps that are allowed to continue and some that have had to be cancelled, and there are some examples of that where we're working with SA Health to provide answers to schools as quickly as possible that are relevant to their circumstances. The Education Department has distributed masks to every site in our public system that are available for staff to use. There's no one hard rule on the use of masks within schools. They are certainly encouraged in environments where adults can't socially distance from each other, and I know that I've spoken to a few principals this morning who have told me that there are fewer people visiting the staff room than usual, and that a number of staff are wearing masks in their own office areas, but it is not a requirement, and indeed most staff are not using masks in the classroom. That is not an expectation of SA Health, but there are a higher number using masks, particularly if they catch public transport to and from school. And we are asking for patience, particularly from parents who we have asked to, in most cases, not come onto the school grounds, certainly this week, and we'll provide updated advice over the course of this week if that's to change. But to reduce the number of adults congregating within the school ground, it's certainly been our advice to schools that they are absolutely empowered to say to the parents that they're not to come onto school grounds. So I ask all parents to be patient as we are dealing with this. There's still a very nasty disease, and there's a cluster that SA Health are working to get on top of. As we have all year, we'll continue to comply with the health advice in our schools. And once more, I thank all of our staff and all of the people who work in education for the great job they've done this year.
Lead Speaker for the Opposition, you're wishing to make an opening statement?
Not only to endorse the comments of the Minister insofar as thanking all the teachers and support staff across all the sites in South Australia for the work that they've done in across the last 9 or 10 months now on behalf of the opposition, and also as the member for Right. They've made a great many sacrifices, including being asked, of course, to go to work and look after our kids, including my own children, when many other people have been able to work from home. So we do offer our very sincere thanks to them and to the staff from the department who provide all the support so they've been able to do that as well. We thank you as well.
With opening statements now concluded, this is Estimates Committee B, and we'll now be examining the proposed payments for portfolios relating to school education. The Minister appearing today is the Minister for Education. The estimates of payments are to the Department for Education of $3,353,642,000. Administered items for the Department for Education are $171,543,000. I now declare that the proposed payments are open for examination and refer members to Agency Statements Volume 1 for the education portfolio. Can we now have questions from members? The member for Right.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, if I could start with Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, pages 190 to 192, which essentially lists capital works that are underway. I note in these budget papers that we don't get a complete exhaustive breakdown of school capital works that are occurring here. Some are lumped into other school projects at the end. But to begin, could I ask about the capital works that are earmarked to be complete by the end of 2021, which I think is the vast majority in time for the transition of Year 7 into high school. Can you give us an update on where we are at with those bills in terms of meeting that deadline?
Yes, look, I thank the member for the question. It's an important question, and perhaps if I provide some broad information and then you can get into specifics if necessary. So I think the member's framing of the question is reasonable. The vast majority of the works that are, or at least the majority of the works that are in the papers are anticipated, are expected, are desired to be completed by the end of 2021 in anticipation of the 2022 school year. It's not that every single one of those works is directly related to increasing capacity for Year 7s. Some of them have to have increased capacity anyway. Some of them are in primary schools. Some of them are about replacing infrastructure that needs to be urgently replaced, and indeed, but the time frame of works enables it to be completed next year. But certainly, there's a big build in the months to come. So there is an expectation that we were going to be completed on time ahead of the Year 7 transition, certainly for those schools. Now, I'm just looking if there's any specific information about timing. Maybe the easiest thing to say is that we are on target, but there are a couple of the schools where the anticipated completion date, we wouldn't want it to go back any further. There are some schools with an anticipated completion date that approaches December of 2021, and we are working with those schools and those projects wherever we can to bring forward their times where possible. And obviously that's something that's going to be of great interest to us, to the community, to yourselves in the coming 12 months.
Member for Wright.
Can you tell us which schools they are that you're working with to make sure that they are going to be on track?
I'll see if I can get some specific examples in the coming minutes, but can I provide further advice that we are actually, even with these ones that are on track for a December completion, that's for completion of all of the works. So we're not in any anxiety about whether the general and specialist learning areas, the classrooms if you like, they will all be well and truly in place. We're very confident of that, and we're just checking in relation to those where there is a risk, where there is a check that we're putting on whether all of the works will be complete.
So these are the 8, as you can see.
It's there for December. So the schools that are currently listed, as I understand it, to have all of that work completed in December of next year: Adelaide High School, Glenunga International High School, Roma Mitchell Secondary College, Nord Morialta High School, Unley High School, and Port Lincoln High School. As now, there are obviously information coming back to the department on a monthly basis, and I get those updates on a monthly basis, so it's possible that some of those may come back into November. Hopefully we can get some of them into October, but at the moment those 6 schools are scheduled to be completed in December. I've also got 2 schools, I think if I'm reading this chart correctly, that are identified to be completed in November, and they are Goolwa, or the new high school in Goolwa, yet to be named. I don't want anyone to read into the fact that I started that with Goolwa. There is no identified name yet, and Henley High School.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. So am I right then in assuming from your answer, Minister, that there are no works that are currently anticipated to be finished beyond December? December is the latest timeline you have for any of the schools that are having works for the transition of Year 7 into high school?
None that would affect the transition of kids. I'm advised that there may be some other minor things like landscaping, those sorts of things where it's not relevant necessarily to the conduct of school education at the school. And indeed, of course, there are other works that are not in our schedule to be completed by the end of next year at the moment that we anticipate already actively will be progressing through 2022.
Thanks, Minister. Do you, by chance, have a list of the schools that fall into the category of needing the more minor works, landscaping and things like that, the non-school-based, non-classroom-based work that needs to be completed?
No, I'll have to take that on notice.
All right, thank you. Minister, the budget papers state that I think it was $175 million in expenditure was anticipated for the last financial year, but my reading of the papers is that 65% of that was spent. Can you explain the reason for the discrepancy between predicted and actual?
Information about...
I think me too, if that's of any help to.
I'll get the Chief Executive, Mr Pearce, to just provide some clarification on that.
Thanks for the question. Assuming this is the number, the 65 million, that's the delta between the 1920 actual and 1920 budget. Basically, what we've got there is a difference that's largely been can be explained by two factors. One is there was some start-stop associated with the pandemic, with construction and so on, with new rules and new operating procedures that had to come in with COVID-safe training for construction workers and so on. The other is a factor which I'd be happy, with the Minister's blessing, to come back with some details on, is work that has been completed but hasn't yet been invoiced. So I'm happy to work with DIT to bring back that information.
So we'll take that aspect on notice.
Statement. I believe the member for Chafey is seeking the call.
Thank you, and Minister. Thank you for your update. Minister, I have a question. Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 190. Minister, can you provide an update on how measures in the budget support schools and preschools in my electorate of Chafey, and how other local works are progressing, please?
Thank the member for Chafey for the question. It's been obviously a very significant injection of cash into a lot of our schools and our preschools through this budget's allocation of grants of $30,000 for urgent maintenance works in our preschool, and grants of between $20,000 and $100,000 to all of our public schools in South Australia. And schools in Chafey will benefit, preschools in Chafey will benefit. It comes on top of the $20,000 grants that all of our preschools had earlier in the year. Now, there's a range of activities that our preschools have undertaken to spend that $20,000. Most of them have spent it and the works have been done, whether that's painting or tiling or roofing or outdoor play areas being upgraded. And indeed, one thing that many of them have had in common is they've been able to identify a use for a further $30,000. So I know that many of them will have no trouble. So whether it's Barmera, Berry, Glossop, Loxton, Monash, Morgan, Renmark North, Renmark West, Swan Reach or Waikerie, all of the children's centres and preschools in the Chafey electorate are now, no doubt now being able to apply themselves to the task of how to spend that $30,000 grant, and then grants of between $20,000 and $100,000 for all of the schools in the electorate. So this is over and above the usual minor works maintenance that is provided by the department, which is in that order of $12 to $16 million a year from central office to support schools over and above the maintenance money that's available in their res to spend supporting maintenance projects in their school. So all of those schools can now undertake projects, and they can be of different scales depending on the size of their grant. Earlier in the year, we also were able to knock off a significant number, more than 100 projects on the Department for Education's maintenance list of the projects that had been approved for minor works but were awaiting funding, and that included $80,000 for the Cobdogler Primary School and $150,000 for Wakery High School, which were able to benefit. Meanwhile, the capital works projects in the seat of Chafee at Glossop High School, where there's a $17.2 million project to bring the two campuses onto one site at Berry, is progressing well, as is Loxton High School's and Renmark's High School's projects, which we were able to talk about. Renmark High School when we visited earlier in the year. They are all absolutely on track to be completed next year.
Thank you, Minister. And just on that, your most recent visit was widely applauded, particularly with that funding stream. So please, you're always welcome to come back.
Member, that questions, not statements. We are in an estimates committee. Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, have any of the school's capital works programs that are ongoing as part of the transition of Year 7 into high school, are any of them budgeted to come under the amounts that were initially provided to them?
Right, if you could please have a reference to the budget line as well, please.
Look, I don't have a detail for you other than that where there are favourable outcomes in relation to tenders, the department's approach is to honour the scope of the project. So once the scope is confirmed, we look to honour that, and I think that where there are favourable outcomes, then I think the department seeks to make sure that the entire scope is honoured. I think that's relevant if there were any value management that had taken earlier on in the process. Then potentially it means that more can be provided to those schools.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give a reference this time. Budget paper 4, volume 1, page 192. Perhaps if I provide an example of part of my question. If there is a school that was provided a $10 million grant under Building Better Schools, some of which was then repurposed for providing or creating more student accommodation in preparation for the transition of Year 7 into high school, and those works came in under the $10 million figure that was initially awarded to the school, will the department be seeking to claw any of that money back from the school or schools?
Just trying to think through the question. Look, I'm happy to take the question on notice. It's a bit hypothetical, but rather than I'll take the question on notice and provide a response. If the member's got a specific one in mind, then maybe we can go into that.
Thank you, Chair. Same budget reference as before. I do have a specific example. I'm told that the Heights School, which is the biggest government school, if not the biggest school in the seat of Wright, which was provided $10 million by the member for Port Adelaide in the previous government for a double gymnasium. Some of that $10 million was repurposed at the behest of the department to accommodate the transition of some Year 7 students onto the Heights School campus. The remainder was there for the school to build a single gymnasium. My understanding is the school has now been told that those works in totality, single gym plus extra accommodation for Year 7 students, comes to $7.8 million, and they must hand the $2.2 million of the remaining 10 that was given them to them by the previous government must now be handed back.
Yeah, look, just further to the previous answer, if there's any clarity sought about what I meant by scope, the scope we mean is the scope we go to tender on, and I'll have to take the question about the Heights on notice.
Thank you. Same budget reference, so you can't rule out in situations like that where the scope is the revised scope from the department. that some money
I just
will
don't
be
have any
taken back.
information here that will assist in that answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Minister, are you aware of any staff from the Education Department engaging with schools directly to advise them that their project is significantly under budget and the remainder will be clawed back, including principals of schools?
Well, there's an agreed scope that goes to tender, and then, potentially some projects I anticipate might come in somewhat under budget, and some might come in slightly over budget. But the Education Department obviously makes absolutely best endeavours to ensure that the scope that goes to tender is an accurate estimation of what the cost is going to be.
Thank you, Chair. I might take you now, Minister, to Budget Paper 5, page 34, Departmental Efficiency Measures. Can you tell the committee, please, Minister, what the current status of efficiency measures that must be met by the agency are?
Are you after a number or
Ideally, Minister, what the targets are, how much of those targets have been met, what's still to be met?
So, and the members are aware, obviously, that the education budget continues to increase across the state. We have efficiencies, as departments do, and by and large education efficiencies are reinvested in education. As part of the 2021 state budget, an additional general efficiencies target totalling $7.5 million has been allocated to education. These efficiency savings come from operational efficiencies in non-teaching and non-school-based areas of the department. The department will continue its harvesting process, which has been an accepted strategy for some time. I'm sure that the members remember it well from time as ministers or chiefs of staff to ministers. It involves harvesting any once-off financial benefits, including vacancies, and that strategy has been utilised to deliver against past savings allocations. It is obviously in education, where if you have a role that is somebody retires at the end of the year, they don't need to be replaced for several months until the beginning of the following year. If somebody stays in the role, then they're paid over the holidays. So that's a benefit that education has generally in meeting its savings. The department's estimate of cumulative savings will increase over the forward estimates period, and bearing in mind this goes back to savings from previous budgets, including those before the transition in governments, well and truly including those. The department's estimate of those cumulative savings increases over the forward estimates period from an estimated $16 million in 2021 to around $30 million from 23-24. A key part of the department's strategy to deliver savings, as I say, is involved in harvesting, underspending and non-salary costs. The department does not hold positions vacant to achieve savings targets, but redirects savings from staffing vacancies that occur to offset the department's savings targets. I mean, there are other activities that are undertaken as well in relation to reducing red tape in our schools. There's a unit, I think it's the Business Improvement Program is what it's called from memory. So the Business Improvement Program is actually a really outstanding program in the Education Department. Its primary purpose is not to deliver savings, although it has been able to do that. Its primary purpose is to deliver an improved experience for families, for staff in schools relating to head office, for families relating to schools. It was established in April 2019 in line with the department's strategic plan priority area to reduce administrative burden and red tape. Its role in doing so has been effective at reducing inefficient or ineffective processes which cause unnecessary frustration, delay or administrative load, particularly for school staff. As I say, its primary objective hasn't been savings, but it has achieved savings. The Directorate was established on a 12-month basis, initially to trial the concept, and its success has meant that it has been funded to run for a further 3 years. some of the focus is really about engagement with end users and co-design at every stage of the process to ensure that the needs of those end users are met. There's workshops with school staff and site visits undertaken to understand their issues and their impact, and schools are involved in testing when solutions are being developed. Some of the examples of the sorts of things that they've achieved are improvements to HR and recruitment systems, processes to improve the speed, user experience and functionality, the development of over 30, so it should be more than 30, digital forms which incorporate significant process improvement using automation, validation, shorter processing times, enhancing to existing systems. An example is the One Plans, which I'm sure members have had feedback on, as I have, about the complexity of the arrangements used over those One Plan documents. So this unit's working with us to dramatically improve those One Plan documents, to improve their speed and their user experience, reducing time in processing transactions, improvements to our systems processes surrounding the management of employable teachers and ancillary staff to provide efficiencies for schools and reducing wasted time pursuing unavailable or ineligible applicants. There's a new and improved digital school card application process which improves the parent or guardian experience and vastly reduces administrative time in schools. There's a new and improved process for the annual transition of Year 7 students to secondary school or Year 6 students to secondary school, as it will be in the future, including the introduction of a digital capability, reducing the administrative burden for schools, and improved data quality, which should result in more accurate matching of students to places, reduced rework and reduced complaints, and the delivery of a new process online to reduce the admin burden of schools associated with polling parents in relation to materials and services charges. Work has begun for a new system to facilitate complaints management across sites and in corporate areas and the management of critical incidents. Work is planned for a second round of improvements to school card and transition processes and a tool to improve the process for the production of annual site reports. There's a process to redesign the system used to support the learning of students with a disability. That's the One Plan I talked about, children in care and Aboriginal students as well. That's some of the things taken. The department will look at other measures if necessary.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Minister. The same budget reference, budget paper 5, page 34. In your answer to my previous question, you mentioned that the education, or the global Education Department budget is growing. How much of that growth is due to enrolment growth from students?
Look, a very significant part of that is obviously due to the growth in enrolment, and that growth in enrolment reflects a confidence that the community has, and I'd say a growing confidence the community has in our public schools. The expectation is that we're going to be employing more than 1,000, well over 1,000 extra teachers in the very near future, and that's a commitment the government has made to enhance that, but it's also due to a range of other things. When we signed the National School Funding Reform Agreement in late 2018, I think was the timing on that. Yes, late 2018. That required the investment, the commitment of our state government, not only unlocked extra federal funding, but it required the investment of, from memory, over $700 million, or around $700 million of extra state funding into our schools, over and above that which was in the budget settings previously identified. Moving Year 7 into high school has required an additional recurrent expenditure in the education budget, which I believe hits the books from the 1st of January 2022, when our Year 7s become classified as high school students. That unlocks extra federal funding. It requires significant extra state funding. There are other examples of increases over and above enrolment growth. So, for example, with the nationally consistent collection of data for disability funding, we've put significant emphasis on that in our education system to ensure that students with disability have the funding stream that will enable our department to work better with them and their families to get the outcomes that they deserve, and that even that work has produced a requirement for extra federal funding and extra state funding as well. And indeed, there are other measures such as that in this year's budget of the maintenance grants that I provided information to the member for Chafee about earlier. Those $20,000 to $100,000 grants, those $30,000 preschool grants, for example, are all new money coming into the system over and above the standard settings. There may be some others, but I think I've probably captured the main ones.
Member for Wright.
Following as a supplementary question from the answer that the Minister's given about enrolment growth, does the Minister have with him, or could he take on notice, the percentage of students enrolled in public versus private schools in South Australia this year, and what the projections are for future years?
Let me check. I may have something. So maybe if I read the table, I don't have the different non-government school sectors, but I have the percentage of FTE enrolments in the government system from the last 10 years. So 2009, 64.5%, 2010, 64.3%, 2011, 64.1%, 2012, 63.9%, 2013, 63.9%, 2014, 63.7%, 2015, 64%, 2016, 64.5%, 2017, 65%, 2018, 64.9%, 2019, an increase to 65.7%. Now that's ABS data, so I would imagine that at some point the 2020 figures will be added to the ABS data. What that table doesn't potentially identify is the specific numbers. So the overall... Just one second. I have some further information that I can provide that has some. It's not for all of those years, but perhaps if I provide it, then you can have a look later and let us know if there is further information you'd like us to track down. So for 2018, there were 45,447 Catholic enrolments. There were 48,827 independent enrolments. There were 174,157 government enrolments for a grand total of 268,432. If they don't add up exactly, it's because they're done by FTE, so there might be some rounding. Primary in the government system was 113,217. Secondary was 60,939. In 2019, the Catholic enrolments had increased by 0.6% to 45,720 enrolments. The independent enrolments had increased by 1.3% to 49,476 enrolments. The government enrolments had increased by 1.3% to 176,376 for a grand total of 271,572. The government enrolments breakdown was 114,415 primary, 960 secondary, and that's probably the same as this information. So I'll leave it there, and if there's more information sought, then we'll see what we can find.
Member for Narungga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I used to have a question that originates in Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 198, under the heading Targets. Can the Minister update this committee on the progress of strategies to address chronic non-attendance?
Look, I thank the member for Narungga for that important question. When we came into government, one of our key focus areas was we wanted to look at the rates of attendance in our schools and what we could do to address that. We know that there is a snapshot of data that shows, as it often does, that on semester 1 2019 there was 97% of schools attend school regularly or have an authorised reason for their absence. That is usually significantly higher on any given day because you have a combination of students that are maybe ill or have a reason for their absence. But a significant proportion of absences recorded as unexplained is a concern at any time. Students not attending school are at higher risk of all range of outcome deficits compared to the rest of the community. Every day of schooling lost is a day of opportunity that is lost for those students. So schools are required to follow up with the family regarding any absence from a school program. They're also required to maintain records of authorised and unauthorised absences in the department's central reporting system. It's worth saying preliminary data seems to indicate that COVID-19 has resulted in decreased average school attendance rate for 2020. As we have seen on many occasions, 2020 has not been a normal year by any measure, and we have worked very hard to get our students back to school, particularly those vulnerable students for whom it is so utterly important. But in a pre-COVID environment, and what will continue to be useful through COVID and post-COVID, the department has reinforced requirements for schools to follow up on student absences, where the evaluation of this is informing a review of department procedures. We've implemented a central social work duty line, which takes consultations and referrals for students where there are attendance or more general wellbeing concerns across the state. We've ensured that there is a strong collaboration between the Education Department, SAPOL, DHS and the Department for Child Protection with regard to confirming student safety where there are long-term absences. We've got a document in the department called Attendance Matters in South Australian Preschools and Schools that emphasises that attendance is everybody's business. It outlines a whole-of-school community approach to attendance and it emphasises the importance of strategies which promote the importance of education in the earliest years, actively engage children, young people and their families, and address barriers to attendance. Examples of the sorts of initiatives that it includes is a new attendance policy which we released last year, which underlines the responsibility of all members of the school community to ensure that our kids are attending school. There's a review of procedures and the development of supporting resources for schools which is underway. We've got a pilot program of parent-targeted social media messages about the importance of attendance at preschool and school. We've used the internal communication channels of the preschools and schools in the Inner West and Port Augusta Corn partnerships. The independent evaluation of that reported positive shifts in parental awareness and attitudes relating to attendance and provided recommendations that we're looking at rolling out across the state. The statewide implementation of that has been delayed due to COVID-19, but I'm very much looking forward to the opportunity to see some of that work more broadly put out next year. There's an online portal for schools now which supports those schools to create local best practice bullying prevention and attendance policies and plans. So as at the 17th of November, 268 of our schools, or about half of our schools, have started that policy or plan using this portal. So they're all supposed to have plans already, but now this portal which ensures that they have best practice in the way that they're delivering that is well and truly being embraced by our schools. So we're anticipating that being even more highly used in the months and years ahead. And a partnership with the Youth Affairs Council of South Australia has provided a youth voice on barriers to attendance and bullying prevention. I want to briefly address an outcome of the Education Children's Services Act amendments, which I know that all members should be rightly proud of. And I thank the member for Port Adelaide for the work that was instigated when she was the Minister and which we grasped with both hands committed to during the election and have indeed now been able to enact with the support of the whole Parliament to amend the Education Children's Services Act to allow for education family conferencing. I think some people might be familiar with the concept of family group conferencing to ensure that it doesn't get confused with family group conferencing that takes place in other circumstances. Those that are taking place in relation to school attendance we're calling education family conferencing. It's an escalation pathway to address chronic non-attendance by supporting families to make decisions about the best way to support them to address the non-attendance of their child. A small pilot was conducted from December 2019 to May 2020 in partnership with the Department for Child Protection and the Courts Administration Authority. A formal evaluation of that pilot has showed really positive shifts in attendance and or attendance-related behaviours in many of the children. Families indicated that the process created an environment where they felt more supported by education to address issues underpinning non-attendance. The conference provided a level of motivation and accountability for families to implement their plans and take action to improve attendance. So education family conferencing for chronic non-attendance will be made available statewide as another option in the suite of respondents to address chronic non-attendance from Term 1 next year. And the model is considered unique in Australia. There's been interest from other states and New Zealand in its rollout. I also just want to reflect briefly, and again, giving some credit to the former minister for another aspect of the program, which we were very encouraging of when the former government announced, I think it was 2017, it might have been 2016, but I think it was 2017, that prosecution of children who hadn't engaged with the process, whose children were not attending, were considered truant, was undertaken. So there were two examples where that took place. It sent a strong message around South Australia, as we knew it would, as we encouraged the government from opposition to, and as the minister defended from some criticism, I'd say, from some on her side of politics, I would suggest at the time, for undertaking it. The outcome that those prosecutions had were improved attendance from the kids involved, a message that the department and the government was willing to use that method, and indeed it fits in very neatly with the education family conferencing process that we are now rolling out across the state, because we don't want to prosecute families. We want to do everything we can to get kids back to school without such a prosecution, but having that education family conferencing as a gateway, I think it's a very healthy encouragement. Having the prosecutions there, the capacity to prosecute there, is a very healthy message to send to those families to get them to engage in education family conferencing. I'm very optimistic about the benefits that it's going to provide to the system in the years ahead.
Member Farrar.
Chair, and as a supplementary to that, Minister, so can you just elaborate, have any prosecutions taken place for chronic truancy in the last financial year, or in the last, I guess, 3 financial years since you became Minister?
No, to my knowledge. The expectation is, of course, that would come through the Minister, and my preference, as I have absolutely said on every single occasion, has been to ensure that every effort is made to engage the child, and we now have, as I just outlined, the education family conferencing model as an opportunity to engage, and I'm really pleased that the pilot has identified that those families that have been approached were indeed successful in engaging in that model, and I think it's had a positive impact on their kids' attendance. That will be rolled out across the state, and my message very clearly to parents whose children are identified as potentially benefiting from that model is that they really need to engage in that model, because I'll have no hesitation in endorsing a request from the department to approve any of those measures of taking them to court if necessary, if they refuse to engage on doing everything that they can to get kids back to school.
Thanks, Minister. Same budget line. Have any recommendations been made to you by the department for prosecutions in your time as Minister?
Out of an abundance of caution, I'll just double check. Recommendations. The strong message, I think, that was sent in 2017, I commended the then Minister then, and I commend her now for making that decision. That's been a very useful mechanism to encourage engagement from parents with schools that are trying to do everything they can to get those kids back to school. And indeed, the education family conferencing model is now available in the first instance. I would suggest that if a family doesn't engage with that education family conferencing model, then that will be very informative to the department and any recommendations they might consider making in the future.
Member Farrar.
Thank you, Minister. If I could just take you back to Budget Paper 5, page 34, on departmental efficiency measures, and the question I asked just before about what percentage, and I'm happy if you want to take this on notice, what percentage of the increase in the overall education department's budget can be attributed to enrolment growth? Do you have a percentage or a total figure on what that might be?
Look, I imagine that there's a vast array of technical detail in any framing of an answer, so I'll take it on notice and we'll endeavour to provide whatever useful information we can.
Thank you, Minister. Same Budget Paper 5, page 34, departmental efficiency measures. My reading of the budget papers is that the efficiency measures with which the department has been tasked over your time as Minister are 11 million, followed by 48 and now 30 million. Is that correct?
So are you asking, to be clear, those that have been added to those which were already in place for these financial years under the previous budget settings, or are you just asking in relation to how much efficiency is expected in each of the financial years?
I'm asking whether or not the departmental efficiency measures put in place for the Education Department in 2018-19 was $11 million. The following year, $48 million on top of that, and in these budget papers, $30 million on top of that again.
I'll double check. From my reading of it, I can only assume that you are including those efficiencies that were announced prior to the election and which were, of course, in the 2017-18 budget, in the mid-year financial... What do they call the mid-year budget review? The mid-year budget review in 2017, the 2017-18 budget and previous budgets and previous mid-year budget reviews. There were efficiency measures put in place for future years, which I think are captured in the years that you're talking about, in the question you're talking about. In addition to that, there have been some further efficiencies requested of the Education Department in the last couple of budgets, and they come up to a total which may well be the figures you've cited. I'll double check that, and I'll seek to investigate also which budgets are responsible for which parts of that allocation.
Thank you, Minister. Maybe I could provide a bit of clarity. What I'm seeking is whether or not in the 2018-19 budget, $11 million of efficiency measures were handed down for the Education Department. In 2019 and 20, whether or not $48 million of efficiency measures were handed down for education. And I can see in this one it's across 4 years, $7.5 million per year at a total of $30 million, and whether or not those three figures come to a cumulative total of $89 million, which the department must meet.
So I'm not trying to be difficult, I promise you. You're identifying the savings over the forward estimates announced in each of those budgets. All right, well, I will double-check that, and also...
As a total figure, if that's possible.
Yeah, as a global figure, and as I say, I'll also do the same for the previous years.
Thank you, Minister. Same budget line, and I accept that you'll be taking this on notice because it flows on from your last answer, but it'd be good to know where the department is at in terms of having achieved those targets as well.
Yes, I'll do that, and I think that obviously the range of approaches we've taken are no doubt by now clearly a matter of public record, but as I alluded to and as the member would be familiar, I think harvesting has been very helpful to us in that.
Member Farad.
Thank you, Minister. The same budget reference, budget paper 5, page 34, departmental efficiency measures. Are there some areas of your agency that will be quarantined from needing to find or contribute towards the global efficiency measure figure that must be achieved?
Yes, look, thank you. Obviously, I've identified harvesting as the main part, so that's useful, but the efficiency savings will be from operational efficiencies in non-teaching and non-school-based areas of the department.
Member Farad.
Thank you. Same budget reference, Minister. Can you rule out that it will be, at least in part, achieved through FTE reductions?
Well, how best to... The number of FTEs in the Education Department includes those in our schools, and that figure continues to go up. I think that that's pretty clear in the budget papers.
Thanks, Minister. My question, though, is can you rule out that FTE reductions, regardless of where they may be, but I accept that you have said that school sites and classrooms will be exempt from these, that the efficiency measures could be met, at least in part, through FTE reductions in the agency?
I'll work with the Chief Executive on a range of recommendations that they may put forward. I know that there are some areas where efficiencies have been what you might call low-hanging fruit. I think in the last couple of years we've talked about the ministerial office being an example of that, where we have a very lean office compared to some previous iterations. And I don't think that I don't think that that's presented a problem to me as a minister. So where there is efficiency, then that can be a very positive thing. Some efficiencies have been able to be done in a quite straightforward fashion, and the Chief Executive will provide me with any other advice that's necessary. And look, I mean, as I outlined before, some of those efficiencies are streamlining and automation of processes. Obviously, I think I identified over 30 processes within the department, and schools have been streamlined through automation and through improved processes. That has a benefit to the end user, whether that's the school or whether that's the family who's seeking a quicker process where they can provide information to a computer to do it very quickly that doesn't require them to spend an inordinate amount of time on the phone to various people. That process streamlining may well have an efficiency as well. I can update that I'm advised by the Chief Executive that further FTE... Yeah, so there's nothing currently planned for any further FTE reductions, but as I say, there have been some streamlined processes that have created efficiency, whether that's meant an FTE reduction or just a sped up process. That would be up to any of those individual 30-odd measures.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, are there any areas of, I'll call it head office, maybe to make it a bit clearer, are there any areas of head office that will be quarantined from the efficiency measures as opposed to school sites and classrooms?
With your indulgence, actually, I'll just invite the Chief Executive to provide a response to that.
Thanks, Mr Boyer, for the question. Obviously, we have a range of staff associated with, colloquially, head office in, say, student support services who actually work with kids. So in terms of providing direct allied health and other services, these are areas that are in high demand, and we would be loath to reduce in that area. In fact, we've been investing in that area, as you can see, through the disability funding. If we were to look at any FTE reduction in the corporate areas, it would only be associated with any business processes, reforms or priorities that were associated with that. But as the Minister said, there's none on the books at the moment, so it's a bit hypothetical at this stage.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr Pearce, for your answer. The same budget line, will the literacy guarantee unit be quarantined from any savings measures?
Yes.
Thank you, Minister. Will the incident management division be quarantined? And I refer to your answer last year in which you said there were no further plans, I think, to make any changes after an initial FTE reduction there.
Look, perhaps I can save some time in the questions that may be about to come. We're not in the business of compromising those critical support services that are absolutely vital to ensuring the well-being of our schools, our students, our staff. I think if there's any efficiencies that might be garnered, then that will be something due to automated processes, for example, then that's to a benefit. But I don't think that there is... we automate processes not to reduce staff, but to provide a better service, as the Chief Executive reminds me. And I'm just not aware of any likelihood of any reductions in that area. But as I say, we have... I think the answer I provided 2 or 3 questions ago, that there's no current plans for any specific FTE reductions, then that would probably be a global answer to any of these questions.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, if I could take you to Budget Paper 3, Volume 1, page 197 in highlights. Can the Minister tell us whether or not the government has met its commitment around permitting sniffer dogs to go into schools to search for drugs, and whether or not that has been enacted or used in this financial year or any others in your term as Minister?
Yeah, look, I thank the member, and I'm aware that the member for Elizabeth, I think, has a question on notice that I'm just waiting for final confirmation on, and I'll hopefully have that submitted very soon. I apologise if that's been out of time. There's certainly been an occasion I think it was late last year, where the protocols were enacted. I think it's fair to say that this year the situation with the pandemic has seen that as being a lower priority than some other uses of resources, and I've been very happy to support those resources being applied to other bodies of work.
Member Farrar.
Thank you, Minister. Same budget reference. Can you maybe explain to the committee what the process is for triggering sniffer dogs to go into schools? Does a request come to you? If so, who does it come from? And have there been any of those requests to you in your time as Minister?
Yeah, look, I don't get involved in that process. The government had an important task to fulfil its election commitment to do a number of things. One was to provide support to a range of non-government organisations to enhance the drug education offerings that were available in schools. Now, I know the former government signed off on an allocation to the Sammy D Foundation. Since coming to government, we've provided funding to Encounter Youth and to Life Education. Those organisations all engage with a range of schools around South Australia and have a very high level service provision, and I'm very pleased with the rollout of those services. In conjunction with that, we committed to developing protocols that would make it simpler and easier for those schools that wanted to engage in this process, or indeed where police wanted to engage in these processes. There are occasions when that might be the case, and indeed those protocols were delivered. They're on the public record. I think during last year they were made available to principals if they wanted to proactively seek an engagement. There's clearly been at least that one that I'm aware of, and where it's been used, but this year it hasn't been a priority. I don't get involved with that process. I don't think it would be appropriate for the Minister to be involved with either asking a school or being the person that the school makes a request to. The school or the police, whichever it is that wants to instigate it, would abide by the protocols, and they are set out in the publicly available document.
Member Farrar.
Thank you, Minister. So, could I ask who is notified, either in your office or if not your office in the agency, when either a school or police, I'm not sure who it is, request that there might be a need to bring sniffer dogs onto a school site?
Look, the responsibility for signing off on it, if from the school's point of view, is rests with the Chief Executive. And I think that I'm trying to remember whether I was notified of the last one before or after it happened. Apparently I get advised as an FYI after the Chief Executive has made that decision.
So just to clarify, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, Minister, you are told after the request is made, or after, in that one case, potentially the dogs have already gone into the school to look?
After the Chief Executive has determined to sign off on the use of the dogs in that on that school site.
Thank you, Minister. Same budget reference. Minister, has your Chief Executive in that case received any more applications for sniffer dogs to go into schools other than the one occasion on which I understand it was approved?
My understanding is that that has happened, but that any of the potential occasions were deferred as a direct result of matters related to COVID and the sorts of, I mean, it was not as high a priority as some other activities by the police officers who might have been undertaking that work, given the extraordinary situation that our state has, our world has confronted this year.
Thank you, Minister. I'm wondering whether you or the Chief Executive, through you, is able to tell us how many times, in addition to the one occasion on which it was approved, that it has been requested that sniffer dogs go onto school sites?
Look, it's hard to answer that directly because while there may well have been more than, there may have been a number of expressions of interest, and I understand that's the case, it was clear from quite early on in that process that the resources to conduct the checks wouldn't be available on a number of those occasions. I would anticipate once police have resumed a more orderly business as usual model in the future, that this will be something that we'll be able to take up more often.
If the member for Davenport has quietly been waiting for the call.
Thank you, Chair. Budget paper 4, volume 1, pages 190, 191. My rather parochial question is directed to expenditure, specifically in the city of Davenport. I note that there's $786 million in total being invested, and in particular, page 191, Aberfoyle Park High School, a total expenditure of $13.269 million. Minister, could you just provide us with further detail of expenditure on other schools and other projects in the electorate?
Look, I thank the member for Davenport for his question, and I know that he's been very eager to have me visit his electorate with him on a number of occasions. I think the last time we were there, we were actually visiting the Aberfoyle Park High School, and it was fantastic to see their project being built and to be given a tour of that work site. I'm very confident that when that is complete, that school will be in a tremendous position to make full use of their brand new infrastructure and their refurbished infrastructure, and I know Marion Cody and her team are really excited about that. Equally, at the Australian Science and Mathematics School, there is also a program that is underway, and I think that when that is complete in the coming years, it will really be an enhancement to what that school is able to offer. Schools in Davenport that were able to benefit from the accelerated maintenance projects, so these were schools that had a project that had been identified by the school and the facilities manager and on the Education Department's approved list for being able to be eligible for funding under minor works, but for whom that minor works funding hadn't been available. When the state government announced an extra $25 million in funding in the earlier stimulus rounds, we were able to see Aberfoyle Park High School benefit from $750,000 worth of minor works, the Australian Science and Mathematics School get an $800,000 project, and the Craigburn Primary School to get an $87,000 boost in their maintenance projects. These, of course, have been added to by the $20,000 grants for all of the preschools in Davenport, the Aberfoyle Hub Preschool on Taylors Road, the Aberfoyle Park Campus Preschool, the Flagstaff Hill Kindergarten and the Flagstaff Oval Kindergarten. Those maintenance projects have been welcomed. They've provided great jobs for local small businesses and tradies in the local area. They've enabled kitchen works, carpeting or tiling. They've enabled nature play areas. They've enabled lifts to the sites in all manners of ways. And as I said to the member for Chafee earlier, one of the things that every preschool director I've spoken to is whatever mechanism they use to identify what that $20,000 project would be used to spend on, every single one of them was able to find a list that they knew that they had more things that they would do if they had a further grant. And so the application in this budget of a $30,000 grant to every single one of those preschools, I know will be welcomed. And this is a sort of opportunity for extra money, extra stimulus money that those preschools have too often been overlooked. And I'm so pleased that they'll benefit from that. And in relation to school maintenance grants, those schools in the member for Davenport's electorate have also benefited from those $20,000 to $100,000 grants. Now, those schools that have capital grants, capital programs underway, and I identified the Aberfoyle Park High School and the Australian Science and Mathematics School, which currently have multi-million-dollar capital projects underway. Those schools get the lower end of the new maintenance grants, so $20,000 for those schools. Largest schools that haven't been the beneficiary of capital works, or for example primary schools that didn't get a STEM works and haven't had a capital works, they benefit from the larger end of the grants. And there's an allocation according to size, but I can tell the member for Davenport that in his electorate, the Aberfoyle Hub R7 school is getting a $70,000 grant, the Bellevue Heights Primary School, the Braveview School R7, the Craigburn Primary School and the Teeley Primary School will all benefit from a $70,000 grant, and the Flagstaff Wagstaff Hill Artis Evans School will get a $100,000 grant to apply to those projects that the school identifies throughout the course of the next year are really high priority. It's a great opportunity to get some works done to lift the school, but also to provide important jobs for local businesses, and that's what the stimulus measure has been designed to do, and I'm really pleased that our schools and preschools will be the prime beneficiaries. Indeed, the prime beneficiaries will be the students attending those schools and preschools.
Excellent. Thank you, Minister.
Member for Elizabeth has been waiting just as patiently and just as eagerly.
Thank you.
Member for
So
Elizabeth.
I'm more eager, I think. I bring you back to the previous discussion about sniffer dogs, which I think is Budget Paper 3, Volume 1, 197. And did I understand from your comments to the member for Wright that some approaches have been made under these protocols by schools or school principals, and they've been subsequently rejected or delayed by SAPOL, who have cited COVID-19 as a resourcing problem in there? Did I understand that correctly?
It was identified that the schools had been advised, I think by my department, potentially on some occasions, that there would need to be some delay or some future consideration of that. Just hold on one second, I'll seek further information.
If that's the case, so any time there's
So, as I understand it, there's discussions when these expressions of interest are made, which are between both the school and local police, and or between the school and their local education team, and or between the school and people higher up in the department. And so it could be at any of those levels where the feedback can be provided that there might not be the right time.
Okay, but does that advice ultimately come from SAPOL, that they don't have the resources at that time?
It's less about resourcing, more about prioritisation. So obviously there are, the member would be as familiar as I that this year the prioritisation is so much that's been going on in SAPOL has been different to what it was last year, for example. The efforts in the southeast, the efforts generally on COVID have required an enormous priority on that. The advice I have is that information could be provided by SAPOL about the priorities, or indeed by people in education. I'll just check if there's further information that's necessary. Yeah, and so there's obviously a discussion in that between education and SAPOL, between the school and SAPOL, about risk management that helps inform that identification of what is the priority. An example, I'm advised that quite recently, I think in the last month, there's an example where SAPOL didn't defer it, we deferred it as an identification of the priorities that we saw.
Okay. Yeah, just one last one on that line then. Given the relative scarcity of these notifications or these expressions of interest, however you want to describe them, however the protocol describes them, given their relative scarcity, I wonder how it could be determined that they are of a particularly low priority. Given that there are police around doing normal police work all the time, they're not so under-resourced that they cannot perform their normal functions. Given the relative scarcity, surely it's a matter of quite some importance to those schools to bring the police sniffer dogs in at that point. Why would the Education Department or SAPOL not consider it a priority?
I think I'd say three things. Firstly, refer you to all of the previous answers that provided a range of information, and ultimately it comes back to this year has seen some extraordinary challenges to SAPOL and some extraordinary challenges to schools, and we're not talking about a business as usual state of affairs. The second point I would make is that the significant focus of our Education Department drugs policy at the last election, it may not have necessarily captured the newspaper headlines or in the same way, but we have a significant commitment for investment in drug education programs. which over the course of the time in government is in the millions of dollars. And that commitment was a priority in 2018. It was a priority before the protocols were completed, and it's been rolled out in schools. And we've been encouraging all of our schools to take up those opportunities to engage with one of those third-party providers who are much better resourced now than they ever were before, to be able to undertake drug education. And then in addition to that, there's been the opportunity for schools to identify an expression of interest. Now, I am not surprised that the determination has been made, whether it's at a local level or at a higher up level, that this year, if there is, once the risk management approach has been looked at, that I would expect that we will have more of these once we don't have the challenges to schools posed by the pandemic, the challenges posed to police and police resourcing posed by the pandemic.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, same budget line, Budget Paper 3, Volume 1, page 197. Was the government's election commitment around sniffer dogs not for random checks of schools?
There's two aspects. The commitment was around developing protocols, and that there would be the expectation that any school student who wanted to bring drugs to school to sell to their mates, or any parent who wanted to give drugs to their child to sell to their mates, would be absolutely at risk of that school being the target of a police dog operation, and that student would have no way of knowing that wasn't going to happen. Now, the protocols have been developed that enable an opportunity, and the protocols were the key election commitment, the development of those protocols that enable for those situations where a school wants to request a check, and then in addition to that, the police are able to identify any school that they want to go and conduct a visit to and do that.
Thanks, Minister. Have there been any random checks of schools in your time as Education Minister for drugs?
The one from last year, I believe, was in line with the school request protocol.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I might take you now to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1 and page 202, and specifically the issue of kids with disability in the public school system. My first question is, I see from these papers that we have seen a big increase of students with disability. I think it's from 16,534 in 2018 to 19,111 in 2019. Do you think we have enough disability-specific places in the system to cope with this increase?
There's a bit to this, so I'll provide some high-level information, and as we go into it, there may be occasions where I might need some further advice from departmental officers. So perhaps is it useful to the member if I potentially provide some information that may be broader than the narrowness of the question, and then we can come back to the detail further if you'd like. Is that okay?
Right.
So preschools and school children and students in government schools and preschools can access teaching and learning support via the Department's Inclusive Education Support Program, IESP. The IESP was introduced at the beginning of the 2019 preschool and school year and replaced the former preschool support and disability support programs. Students, according to this model, are now funded according to their functional need rather than their disability diagnosis or label. This is an important development because diagnosis is not the only determinant of funding. Rather, the functional need of a child, the adjustments the teacher needs to make to support that child's learning, are now the driver of teaching and learning support. The new funding model has seen greater investment in supporting students with disability than ever before. So in 2019, preschool children with disability were allocated a total of $11.38 million compared to $7.22 million in 2018. In 2019, school students with a disability, including those in specialist education options, were allocated $255 million compared to $255.2 million compared to $230.6 million. That was a 10.66% increase in 12 months. At the Term 3 Census 2020, 21,115.7 FTE students were being supported under the IESP. This includes students in receiving targeted categories of funding allocations and support via the IESP grant. This is a 10.5% increase in FTE from the previous year, where it was 19,111.2 FTE. The largest increases have occurred in the areas of autism and complex social and emotional behaviour. In preschools, as at Term 3 2020, 230 FTE have been funded at the extensive level. There were 404 FTE in 2019 and 66 FTE in 2018. Now, perhaps in relation to special options, which I think is probably directly in the wheelhouse of where the member's question was, 84.3% of students with disability attend mainstream schools, 15.7% attend a specialised educational option, 6.7% are in a special class, 4.3% are in a disability unit, 4.7% are in a special school. In 2020, student enrolments in specialised education options were 984 in special schools, 906 in disability units, 1,425 in special classes. The department has a number of specialised education options geographically placed across South Australia to meet local demand. That's 151 special classes, 39 disability units, 15 special schools, 1 school for vision impairment, 4 centres of deaf education. These used to be called Centres for Hearing Impaired. The CHI schools, as the member might recall, we call those Centres of Deaf Education now, which I think has been a change that has been welcomed by advocates that I've spoken to. 6 speech and language classes, 16 inclusive preschool programs, and 1 dedicated preschool at the Briars. The number of specialised education options has been expanding. So using projection data, the department anticipates further expected need, though it's complex because parent choice, family movements and student needs fluctuate. This year we have made a number of recent announcements of increased specialised educational options. We've got special classes at Salisbury East High School and Mount Gambier High School, providing an additional 24 places from the beginning of this year. Nooryup High and Springbank College have each converted one of their disability unit classes of 8 to a special class of 12 students due to a changing mix of student need away from the more intensive disability unit towards the less intensive special class. The conversions provided an additional 24 special class places from the beginning of this year. A 2-class disability unit at Modbury Special School now provides an additional 16 places, and that has been in place since the beginning of Term 3. A further 3 secondary schools at Golden Grove, Salisbury and Para Hills will each convert one of their disability unit classes of 8 to a special class of 12 places, again due to a changing mix of student need away from the more intensive disability unit towards the less intensive special class. These conversions will provide an additional 36 special class places from Term 1 next year. There are 180 extra places at 11 secondary schools, as part of the Year 7 to High School project that commenced in 2022, and I think although 11 of those have been announced publicly. There are an additional 104 special options placements at each of the 2 new schools in Angle Vale and Aldinga, which were opening progressively in 2022. There is an additional special class included in the design of the new Whyalla Secondary School, bringing the total to 48 special class places there. We've got a feasibility study examining the future need for Ceduna Area School. We've got the process, and this is really important because I think this gets to the nub of where there's some anxiety in the community about whether or not a parent's child is going to be able to access a place. So the process of placing students in specialised educational options is based on need. There are 3 stages. In Term 2, they're looking at the secondary, and early Term 3, primary, and late Term 3, preschool and junior primary. In response to the number of children who were not able to be offered a place through that process. The department this year has established additional classes, an Ingle Farm East Primary School, which will offer an additional disability unit class and a primary special class. The South Downs Primary School will offer 2 additional disability unit classes, and Balaclava Primary School will offer a new disability unit class. The classes provide an additional 32 disability unit places and 12 special class places, and a further 6 schools are still under investigation, where we're looking for possible further expansions for next year. The department is also investigating opportunities to place more children who were not able to be offered a special option place in those first rounds. Because children are continuing to be placed, more settled placement data will be available in the next 2 weeks. We are wanting to make sure that every child in our system is given the support that they need. There's no cost saving to the department if the child is identified as being in a mainstream class with additional support. The important thing is that the placement in a class, that class should be relevant to the needs of that child. Not just their well-being needs and their developmental needs, but their educational needs as well. We don't want a situation where a child with extra support is being put in a place that will give them no educational benefit whatsoever. We would rather provide extra support to them in a mainstream class. But that said, we are working extremely hard overtime to enhance the offerings and ensure that they can have educational growth in a setting that's appropriate. That's why all of these additional special classes, disability units that I've just gone through have been added to the system over and above what was there last year to meet some of that gap in where the provision was. And as I say, there are 6 further schools where extra provision is currently under investigation, and I believe in the next 2 weeks. In the next 2 weeks, those final decisions will be further made. Any mainstream student, if there are any mainstream students next year with a student who meets that need that is unplaced, they will receive IESP resourcing to ensure that student's learning success. This is not a cost saving for the department, but I am pleased that even though the growth in demand, the growth in the need for the number of places has been significant year on year, the gap between the number of students who need that extra support and the number of students receiving an appropriate placement has diminished dramatically this year. We will want it to continue diminishing, but I'm sure that when the former Minister, the member for Port Adelaide, first I think in 2016 sought the central collection of this data, she would recall the challenge that was to the system then, with well over 100 students at that stage who were unable to be found an appropriate placement and were given support in the mainstream setting instead. We have got that number well down. We're still looking to support all of those children who are left. Prior to 2016, we don't have data on this because it just wasn't collected centrally.
Member Farrar.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. How long is the wait list for a special options placement, whether it be a special class, a disability unit or a special school in the southern and northern suburbs, if you have that data?
Let's see what I've got at hand.
Thank you.
So to be clear, there's no wait list as such in terms of if a child's been identified, then they'll get support. The question is, and I think this is what the member's getting at, I'm not meaning to be difficult in any way. I'm sure that the member would agree with this characterisation that a child's identified as needing the support, they're going to get the support. Now, ideally, the support's going to be in the class or unit or setting that has been identified as most appropriate. And if their places have not been identified that enable them to fit that, they will get a body of support through the ISP funding model to enable them to have that wraparound support in a mainstream setting. Now, I don't have disaggregated data by region. As I say, this is changing every day as more placements are being found and those classes are coming online. I would anticipate that by that well before the estimates responses are due according to the usual process, we'll have some pretty clear data. So I'm going to take the question on notice on the basis that the information is changing every week. And I'll endeavour to not just wait until estimates responses are due, but to get back directly to the member for right and to those parents of families who have sought specific information in relation to their children as soon as possible. Each one of their cases is very important, and they're going to want to know by the end of the year if a placement in a unit or a class, whichever is relevant, is able to be done by the beginning of next year, or if there's going to have to be some extra level of support to support them in a mainstream setting. And we will be, we take these responsibilities very, very seriously, and I have great confidence in the department because I've seen the numbers coming down compared to previous years quite dramatically, that we're very much on track to have more children than ever before placed in a setting that is appropriate to their education and wellbeing needs.
For Chafee.
Minister, I've got a question, Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 198. Minister, can you please advise the committee of the progress of the government's reforms in vocational education and in particular how the government's going to get more school students into apprenticeships, traineeships and other vocational pathways that will lead into jobs?
Look, I thank the member for Chafee for this question. I think that there's a dramatic need for reform in this area that has been really needed for some time, and the opportunity to have more of our young people on a pathway to a positive employment outcome has never been more important than at this time where the economy has taken such a hit and people have been concerned about their futures. Their future wellbeing. We took to the election a really important policy of providing $200 million to enhance educational outcomes for apprentices and trainees, employment outcomes for apprentices and trainees. And indeed that has been a significant effort of both the Education Department and also the Department for Innovation and Skills. And indeed it's been heartening in the last year to see South Australia really bucking the national trend in relation to commencements of apprenticeships and traineeships, dramatically improving in South Australia at a time where they've continued to go backwards around the country. And that has continued as recently as the figures I saw earlier this year. And schools are an important part of that. So one of the things that we want to make sure our schools are doing is really looking at this from a point of view of pathways from a student that enables them to get their say. So it's an important part of their education, but be on a pathway to employment if they're undertaking vocational education. The VET for School Students policy, announced in October last year, really brings industry and schools together to clearly articulate those pathways. The department, in partnership with industry over the months since, I'm really proud, has developed 27 what we call flexible industry pathways. They map out a student's journey through secondary school and they articulate the qualifications, the trainings and skills that are required by employers in a number of those key growth industries in our state. So as part of a flexible industry pathway, which I'm going to call a FIP, actually now I think I'll call it a flexible industry pathway on reflection, schools are supported to use the flexibilities in the space to tailor a learning experience to students' chosen pathways. So the first pathway commenced in July with 18 students commencing at ASC Shipbuilding Readiness Training Program at Osborne. The program supports students to complete their SACE while undertaking a Certificate 2 in Engineering and beginning a paid traineeship in the defence industry. The ASC plan to take The ASC plans to take on 1,000 students as trainees throughout the lifetime of the $90 billion shipbuilding project, and a further 22 students will commence that program in December. These are students from around schools, not just one school, but students who have an interest in going to work in this area. They are working in this area now while they complete their SACE, and they're also getting further qualifications to boot. So schools are also partnering with industry to give students exposure to workplaces and employers through the Industry and Employer Immersion Program. The program immerses students in workplace activities such as industry challenges or competitions, workplace visits, career expos and events, virtual work experience and work-related projects. For example, the department's Capital Works program has provided the opportunity for schools to work with builders and subcontractors on site to immerse students in their building projects, exposing them to the workplace and building awareness of the building and construction industry. For students interested in pursuing a career in the building and construction industry, opportunities for apprenticeships and traineeships exist through a flexible industry pathway. But can I say how exciting it is for those students who are seeing schools, their school potentially transformed, and at the same time those students can have the opportunity to be part of that transformation, getting qualifications but actually contributing to the work. And I really want to express my particular appreciation to those employers, those businesses who have engaged with the Department for Education, those builders who have wanted to get some apprenticeships and traineeships and industry engagement students on site being part of their builds. Because they know that these are going to be the workforce that they're going to have in the future. They want them to be energised and motivated and to develop the right skills from an early age so that they can have prosperous careers in that really growing industry. The department's also working on enhancing career education in schools. This is a really important part of the mix. And we've developed guidelines for best practice career education to ensure that every student has industry engagement opportunities, understands their pathway options, and can manage their career across their lifetime. The World of Work Challenge, or the WOW Challenge, as I'm being encouraged by some to call it, will launch in 2021. It will encourage students in years 7 to 10 to participate in 100 hours of work exposure, including work experience, industry events, volunteering and careers expos. The WOW Challenge, or potentially the World of Work Challenge, will enable students to learn firsthand from employers about employment opportunities, the skills that are valued in the workplace, supporting students to make informed decisions about their learning and pathway options as they approach senior secondary school. In preparation for full implementation in 2022, a series of early adopter projects will be piloted in schools through 2021, including the flexible industry pathways. Apologise for that. The Pathways Readiness and Employability Program for those students who need further foundational skills to prepare them for the workforce or VET, and a broader area partnership hub and spoke model to support schools to collaborate and share resources. I'm really excited about the work that's been done here, and I think in the years ahead we're going to see the fruits of it identified as more and more of our young people are well on the way with qualifications underway, getting their SACE, and also a contract of employment and training already underway in industry, and we're going to need it to meet the workforce needs of the futures, because there's significant areas, whether it's shipbuilding, whether it's care, whether it's building industry, where we know we're going to need people working in these industries. So getting young people excited about them and on their way to those careers is a really important part of the puzzle.
Thank you, Minister.
Member for Wright.
Chair, Minister, if I could take you to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 198, and specifically targets. My recollection is that there was a threshold of enrolments at schools, but I think more precisely primary schools, at which there would automatically be a review into the viability of the school triggered. Is that the case? And if so, do you know what the threshold figure is?
Thank the member for the question. I've got to say I wasn't aware that there was a magic number, and I'm informed that there's not a particular number that is used for that purpose. And I mean, there are some sites that have identified in the last couple of years. I'm trying to think of the examples. The East Murray School was one. I think there's about 2 or 3 schools. Tantanoola, I recall being one where we actually reached a stage where there were I think 4, then 3, then 1, then 0 students. And even when there were a very, very small number, the response that I had was that there was a voluntary amalgamation process that the school could investigate if they wanted to. And indeed, I think when there was 1 student left interest in the school, I'm sure that there was some encouragement for further consideration to be given at that point. I mean, it wasn't going to be in that student's interest, in my view, to have no peers to engage with at school. But it's very much the voluntary amalgamation process, which I think was started under the former government from 2002 to 2018. I've said in opposition that it was a good model. It continues to be a good model. Schools get the benefit of the capital sale, and they get I think a 3-year benefit from the savings of running 2 separate sites that can be applied directly to that school. And so there's a number of schools, particularly the really small ones, where some families leaving can have a big impact on them, and they have a look at that process. But we're not forcing anyone to close.
Member Farrar.
Thank you, Minister. I accept maybe my recollection is wrong. I did recall, I thought that there was a figure somewhere in the vicinity of 30 pupils, at which point there was some kind of automatic trigger for a review of the school's viability. Well, I accept I might have that wrong.
Whether that has at some point been the case, I can't speak to. It's not the case now. I'm not aware of it having been the case in my time as the Minister.
Thanks, Minister. Same budget line. So what is it that potentially, under the current processes, triggers a review into viability or a potential voluntary amalgamation?
Yeah. So there's obviously one example where I did authorise an educational review at Springbank, and I think it's a matter of public record that the government felt that rather than the proposed outcome there was a better outcome that could be achieved, and which we're now on track to achieving. And I think that that's a great outcome for everyone involved. I think that Tantanoola may have been an educational review as well, and that was in the circumstances that by the time I was authorising an educational review, there were 0 students, and I think that that speaks for itself in terms of its... Yeah. Because, so I mean, I think by the time we got to a review, there were 0 students at that stage. The family had obviously had a number of discussions with people in the education department about how to best support their child's needs, and ultimately settled on a different school. And so an educational review was the only sensible course of action there. I'm trying to remember whether Minterby was an educational review as well, but that might not have been. So that might have been a different arrangement. In relation to a voluntary amalgamation process, a school that's interested in that is able to access information. They'd obviously want to identify whether it's a nearby school or a preschool. Potentially, in some cases, it's been a preschool located immediately adjacent that has been the voluntary amalgamation partner, if you like. And there can be any number of methods of getting that information, whether talking to their local education team or to the department's infrastructure team, or through looking at publicly available material and then seeking information about how to access the process. Those voluntary amalgamations rely on a discussion within the school community and an intent from the school communities to want to do it.
Member Farrar.
Thank you, Minister. And before I ask this question, I accept that perhaps there is not a threshold figure at which a review into primary school viability is triggered, but nonetheless I'll ask these next couple of questions just in case. So as a result of moving Year 7 students into high school, how many primary schools in metropolitan Adelaide will have less than 30 students at the start of 2022? How many will drop below the figure of 30?
Metropolitan, look, I'd be surprised if it was many, but the definition of metropolitan obviously extends 75 kilometres from the CBD, as my recollection serves, and so there may well be...
I reckon there's some people who can help you out with that distance in this chamber.
Numbers, sorry?
Sorry.
Look, I can speak from my own electorate experience. I know the Basket Range Primary School used to have fewer than 30, and now has well over that number, so I don't think they're going to be in any jeopardy. There's also some information about that we know that where there are schools that have high proportions of kids who are going into area schools or Catholic schools or independent schools or R to 12 schools that already have Year 7 in high school. Some of the local primary schools already have diminished numbers of Year 7s compared to others. A significant body of work was done prior to, well, I think last year, most of it, in relation to consulting with schools about transitional arrangements. Those transitional arrangements are more relevant for regional communities than metro. If there are some schools classified as metropolitan under 30 who we anticipate to drop under 30 as a result of the change, then I'll bring back that information But let's take it on notice just for the sake of clarity.
Member for Right.
Thank you, Minister. And my next question was going to be the same question about regional areas, which I accept you can take on notice if you wish.
Yeah, so it may be easiest if I just take that on notice.
Thank you, Chair. I guess the Minister no doubt understands where I'm coming at with these questions in terms of primary schools that lose significant numbers of their school population because Year 7s will no longer be on those school sites. Is the Minister, I guess, making a blanket promise not to close any primary schools that might have diminished or significantly diminished enrolment numbers due to this transition?
Well, I've always said that we're not going to be forcing anybody. There is actually some information that I can probably share with the member that may even resolve some of the earlier questions that I took on notice. We might make a judgment at the end of this, but perhaps this will help directly with the question just asked. So we recognise that a number of families, particularly in the country, that had concerns about Year 7 moving into high school. So we undertook a range of consultation from July to September 2019 to understand the concerns of those communities, to ensure transitional arrangements reflected those concerns, and so we developed these transitional arrangements, particularly for regional communities. The transitional arrangements apply to 46 eligible primary schools. Parents at eligible primary schools and these primary schools are schools that are a certain distance from the local area school, 20 kilometres from the local school offering a secondary enrolment. By exception, they can seek exemption from their principal to keep their Year 7 child in primary school, where the departure of the Year 7 cohort causes an eligible primary school to drop below 4 classes. Top-up grant funding will be made available to maintain the number of classes. School eligibility is determined on the basis that the school is more than 20 kilometres by road from its nearest area or high school. It also includes the school of the air in recognition of the unique circumstances of those students. They don't have to go to boarding school, certainly in that first year until Year 8, if that's what their family wants to do. Since the original list of eligible primary schools was issued in November 2019, and I think that the then Shadow Minister would have got a briefing from the department at that time, Goolwa Primary School is no longer eligible due to the Goolwa High School opening in 2022. And again, I reiterate, don't read anything into my reference to Goolwa High School. It might be called that, it might be called something else. These arrangements will apply for a transitional period from 2022 to 2024. In relation to small schools more generally, the Department currently provides small schools with extra funding in the form of Small Schools Base and Small Schools Primary Step model. Schools with fewer than 40 students receive the maximum amount of support. In 2020, 133 schools received the Small Schools Base funding, and a further 40 schools are funded under the Small Primary Step model. Small schools funding does not distinguish between country and metropolitan schools. Small metropolitan primary schools also receive extra funding. A preliminary analysis that involves removing the current Year 5 cohort from total enrolments suggests that as a direct result of the move of Year 7 to high school, the number of schools under 40 enrolments will grow from 44, which is currently, to 52. So 8 schools. The impact in very small schools will be uneven. For example, for 4 schools with enrolments below 40, there is no Year 5 cohort at all, so there may be no impact in 2022. We recognise these changes occur in a broader context for regional and small schools communities. It may be an example, and I'm familiar with one where there's just a large family, where you have one family move out and that can be half of the school enrolments, and that in itself can make a much bigger difference than the 0 school students at Year 7 and 22 would have been. That can happen too. So there's no minimum viability that we require for the support of a school, and that's a commitment that I'm certainly happy to maintain in relation to this project. And that actually probably covers both of the questions that I earlier took on notice. It doesn't differentiate between the schools in metro and regional because, as I say, we don't keep that differentiated.
So, thank you, Minister, and that does help. So just as a supplementary, I guess, the figure that you gave of schools that will fall into the small schools category of having, I have to say, fewer, and the member for Port Adelaide staff has just written to me making sure I say fewer and not less. So if he's
Michael
listening,
Atkinson would be so proud.
I feel it's only right that I embarrass him in Hansard for daring to message me during this. Although if my mum was listening, she'd be doing the same thing. Am I right in saying that the increase from 44 to 52 is across all schools in South Australia projected? Is that metro or regional?
Yes, so to be clear, there are, as I understand the information, the number of schools that have fewer than 40 enrolments, a school population of less than 40,
well done.
is 44 at the moment.
Oh.
And if you remove all of their current Year 5s, then that would increase the number of schools with fewer than 40 students to 52, on the basis that those Year 5s will be entering high school in 2 years' time rather than staying in their current primary school. Now, that is a blunt measure. That doesn't take into account that some of them might have moved to a local Catholic school or a local area school a year earlier than that anyway. But that's the basis on which 8 extra schools, if losing their Year 5s, will drop under the 40 level.
If you can reply.
Thank you, Minister. If I could take you to Budget Paper 3, Volume 1, page 193, targets, and specifically the no jab, no play policy. Minister, did you seek an exemption from the commencement of the no jab, no play policy for preschool sites, for government preschool sites?
Specifically, do this now rather than in early childhood?
Well, it's I don't mind. I can do it in either, but there's a budget reference there that I use. But I'm happy to move it to child development if you would prefer.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it's really an early childhood area. The school education is got a different arrangement because the no jab, no play legislation applies to early childhood settings, not to schools. Schools are compulsory.
To shift and move advisors, perhaps, if we do leave that till that point in time where somebody else comes forward.
Happy to come back to it.
Yep, fine, no worries. So, Chair, I understand that we have only about 7 minutes left until a break. Is that right?
Correct.
I may take this opportunity to read omnibus questions for.
Absolutely, go for it. Member for
Is that all? Okay. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, what is the actual FTE count at 30 June 2020 and the projected actual FTE count for each year of the forward estimates? What is the total employment cost for each year of the forward estimates? What is the notional FTE job reduction target that has been agreed with Treasury for each year of the forward estimates? Does the agency or department expect to meet the target in each year of the forward estimates? How many TVSPs are estimated to be required to meet FTE reductions over the forward estimates? And that was question 1. Question 2, for each department and agency reporting to the Minister, how much is budgeted to be spent on goods and services for 2020-21 and for each of the years of the forward estimates period? The top 10 providers of goods and services by value to each agency reporting to the Minister for 2019-20 and a description of the goods and or services provided by each of these top 10 providers and the cost to the agency for these goods and or services. The value of the goods and services that was supplied to the agency by South Australian suppliers. Question 3, between July 1, 2019 and 30 June 2020, will the Minister list the job title and total employment costs of each position with a total estimated cost of $100,000 or more, which has either 1, been abolished or 2, which has been created? Question 4, will the Minister provide a detailed breakdown of expenditure on consultants and contractors above $10,000 between the 1st of July 2019 and the 30th of June 2020 for all departments and agencies reporting to the Minister, listing the name of the consultant, contractor or service supplier, the cost, the work undertaken, the reason for engaging the contractor and the method of appointment? Question 5. For each department and agency for which the Minister has responsibility, how many FTEs were employed to provide communication and promotion activities in 2019-20 and what was their employment expense? How many FTEs are budgeted to provide communication and promotion activities in 2020-21, 2021-22, 2022-23 and 2023-24 and what is their estimated employment expense? The total cost of government paid advertising, including campaigns across all mediums in 2019-20 and budgeted costs for 2020-21. Question 6. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, please provide a full itemised breakdown of attraction and retention allowances as well as non-salary benefits paid to public servants and contracts between the 1st of July 2019 and the 30th of June 2020. Question 7. What is the title and total employment cost of each individual staff member in the Minister's office as at the 30th of June 2020, including all departmental employees seconded to ministerial offices? Question 8. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, could you please detail A, how much was spent on targeted voluntary separation packages in 2019-20? What department funded those TVSPs? That was B. C, what number of TVSPs were funded? D, what is the budget for targeted voluntary separation packages for financial years included in the forward estimates by year, and how are these packages funded? E, what is the breakdown per agency or branch of targeted voluntary separation packages for financial years included in the forward estimates by FTEs? 9. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, how many executive terminations have occurred since the 1st of July 2019, and what is the value of executive termination payments made? For each department, this is question 10, for each department and agency reporting to the Minister, what new executive appointments have been made since the 1st of July 2019, and what is the annual salary and total employment costs for each position? Question 11. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, how many employees have been declared excess? How long has each employee been declared excess? And what is the salary of each excess employee? Question 12. In the 2019-20 financial year, for all departments and agencies reporting to the Minister, what underspending on operating programs, 1, was and 2, was not approved by Cabinet for carryover expenditure in 2020-21? Question 13. In the 2019-20 financial year, for all departments and agencies reporting to the Minister, what underspending on investing or capital projects on programs 1, was and 2, was not approved by Cabinet for carryover expenditure in 2020-21? How much was sought and how much was approved? 14. For each grant program or fund the Minister is responsible for, please provide the following information for 2019-20, 2020-21, 2021-22, 2022-23, 2023-24 financial years. And A, name of the program or fund. B, the purpose of the program or fund. C, balance of the grant program or fund. D, budgeted or actual expenditure from the program or fund. E, budgeted or actual payments into the program or fund. E, budgeted or actual payments into the program or fund. F, carryovers into or from the program or fund. And G, details including the value and beneficiary of any commitments already made to be funded from the program or fund. Question 15. For the period of 1 July 2019 to 30 June 2020, provide a breakdown of all grants paid by the department agency that report to the Minister, including when the payment was made to the recipient and when the grant agreement was signed by both parties. 16. For each year of the forward estimates, please provide the name and budget expenditure across 2020, 21, 21, 22, 22, 23 and 23, 24 financial years for each individual investing expenditure project administered by or on behalf of all departments and agencies reporting to the Minister. Question 17. For each year of the forward estimates, please provide the name and budget for each individual program administered by or on behalf of all departments and agencies reporting to the Minister. Question 18. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, what is the total cost of machinery of government changes since 1 July 2019? And please provide a breakdown of those costs. 19. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, what new sections of your department or agency have been established since 1 July 2019 and what is their purpose? Question 20. For each department and agency reporting to the Minister, what savings targets have been set for each year of the forward estimates? What measures are you implementing to meet your savings targets? And what is the estimated FTE impact of these measures? I think that's all.